and I did say that I felt that the parliament, the 10th parliament was ruined. And we have been stuttering along with great difficulty, and we have all come again to the great expectations with respect to the developmental program of the budget proposed by the government for approval by the House. And we have had what I think is a astounding intervention, even though it was proposed, with respect to a major transformational project for our country. Infrastructure, as you know, sustains and propels the country's economy and its development. Well, don't let me say infrastructure alone, but it's a main pillar with respect to sustaining and improving our country's economy. And in the presentations tonight on my ministry, the Ministry of Public Works that is, we have surprisingly been unable to convince the Parliament, that is the opposition in fact, that the sums requested for the Cheddi Jagan International Airport modernization project, a sum of $5,350,000,000, all has been cut from the budget, and the head related to that, the 313 transport head. The main issue, as I'm saying, is are the arguments or discussions. It might have been the latest of the hour. The fact that it was midnight, the witching hour. The fact that people started talking and lost their way along in their trends of thought. The fact that egos seem to have played seemingly a major part in the presentations, because members on the other side kept going around to all other issues not related specifically to the head, which was under discussion, and a general debate more or less ensued under the head. And we resulted in all the monies from this head being removed. It affects hinterland and coastal airstrips at an amount of $175 million. Well, I don't have I will have to get the listings for you, but all the hinterland airstrips, we maintain 48 standing airstrips in the interior of our country, and we have to respond to issues related to mining and forestry, transport for the hinterland communities, including our indigenous Amerindian communities. These airstrips require constant maintenance. This appropriation requested has been refused. There's equipment for civil aviation. This is for the purchase and installation of equipment at the tower at CGIA. You may know that the government of Guyana has been investing progressively over the years in the modernization of our aircraft systems, the air navigation systems, to modernize it and make it all safe. We invested in the Hydromet Tower. We invested in new equipment, over $1 billion for the tower, for air navigation systems at Timeri, CGIA, and at Ogle also. And we have additional purchases of what are termed ADSBs, which are tracking equipment to modernize the safety and vectoring of aircraft. This has been cut. We have for the Ogle Aerodrome provisions for some final payments related to the EU loan that the government undertook for this facilitation, a public-private partnership. $26.3 million have been taken. But again, I come back to the unkindest cut of all. This is the removal of all the monies with respect to the CGIA modernization project, a project which Guyana, and I say Guyana, agreed with the government of China. There was a high-level meeting between Guyana and China at a Caribbean China Developmental Financing Summit, where a Chinese vice president came, where there were large sums of money being made available at that time, and where projects had to be proffered and accepted by the Chinese side for financing. And we had one mature project at that time which could have been taken on board by the Chinese government, and they agreed with us. We have said here tonight that all the matters relating to this project, this is a transformational project. We've said that there are capacity constraints at the CGIA. We've said that we'll be out of the window in which certain types of efficient aircraft could land at CGIA. We said that there are capacity constraints with respect to the size of the terminal building, its comfort and its safety. We've said that there were geometric and capacity constraints with respect to the length of the runway, that it had to be extended by 1,000 meters. This has all been accepted and approved by IATA, ICAO, and all the organizations which relate to international civil aviation. And here it is. We, in this honorable house, still honorable, in our greatest wisdom and with all information proffered and examined. In fact, we presented the contract and documentations with respect to this matter since last year, and the House approved the initial financial sums in last year's budget with respect to this project. So apparently there were issues with respect to some members on the other side's ability with respect to being able to count. But we can't turn the house into Sesame Street. We can't, this is a serious matter. I want to say, as Minister of Public Works, how profoundly disappointed I am in this matter. Profoundly disappointed. I want to say again, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable based on the trend that we were following. And I again want to point to issues of ego and wanting to leverage and perhaps wanting to extract certain concessions, and issues of moving the goalposts, and issues even while the discussion, which should not have been entertained, was on the way. But I'm too hard to say much more now. So maybe I'll ask the Honorable Finance Minister on the financing side.
Thank you.
Is more expert in these matters.
Thank you very much, Robson, and colleagues of the Cabinet, ladies and gentlemen of the media. For almost all of the life of the 10th Parliament, much concern has been expressed about the opposition's apparent reluctance to use its one-seat majority in a responsible manner. And there exist a multitude of examples of this one-seat majority being used in an irresponsible manner, sometimes even a tyrannical manner. Minister Ben spoke of the tyranny of one. Let me say, though, that there are a few things that could have prepared us as a country for what we witnessed today. I believe that towards the end of today's sitting, we witnessed the most irresponsible display of how this tyranny of one can act. Why do I say this? The developmental merits of the Cheddi Jagan International Airport Modernization Project are clear for all to see. Minister Robson Ben has elaborated eloquently on the compelling necessity of this project, and I don't intend to repeat any of what he said. Important stakeholders in this country, including the organized private sector, have expressed their strong support for this project, recognizing the private sector growth, the growth in private sector activity that would be catalyzed by this project. The manner in which this project will transform Guyana as the destination for international travel and for transit international travel, and indeed transform the East Bank Corridor, part of the development of the East Bank Corridor, A modern airport comes with economic activity, shops, restaurants, banks, etc., at the Timeri end of East Bank, creating jobs for people who live on East Bank, people who live in Linden, etc. Jobs and business opportunities for all of those people. So the developmental merits of this project speak for themselves. The opposition tabled a motion to cut this project entirely out of the budget. Mr. Greenidge tabled a motion to cut this project's allocation of $3.5 billion to $1, and Mr. Ramjatan tabled a motion to cut the $3.5 billion to zero. 3.5 billion, sorry. My apologies, $5.3 billion. My apologies, $5.3 billion. The demerits in their proposal to cut this project are many. First of all, like I said, the project is a good project. But secondly, this very House approved the inclusion of this project in the 2012 budget. This House, in which this one-seat majority was already in place, last year approved the inclusion of this project. Thirdly, every question that was asked by the opposition was answered abundantly and fully, and an indication was given by Minister Ben that any additional information and documentation required would be made available. In fact, we have already voluntarily made publicly available the documents that relate to this project, including the loan agreement signed and the contract executed with the construction company. Those documents have already been placed in the public domain voluntarily and willingly by this government a long time ago, more than a year ago. Fourthly, the point was made that this project was the subject of a China-Caribbean Development Summit and was identified as a priority project in the bilateral cooperation agenda between Guyana and China is a very important partner to this government. Fifthly, the point was made in the full House today that a legally binding contract exists between the government of Guyana and the company constructing the airport. And pursuant to the terms of that legally binding contract, a mobilization advance has been paid to that company out of the appropriations approved by this opposition-controlled parliament last year. And then finally, well, all of those arguments having been made and statements and offers of additional information, assurances of additional information having been made in the parliament, the opposition still moved their cut. It was then pointed out by our very alert Chief Whip that the opposition was in fact endeavoring to cut more than what was provided in the budget, an impossibility, an arithmetic and legal impossibility. The Chief Whip, before the conclusion of the vote on their cut, raised this matter in the open house, pointed out that an attempt to cut more than an allocation, essentially an attempt to appropriate a negative amount, would be an illegality and an illogicality. And on those bases, the Chief Whip moved that the motion to cut, both in Mr. Ramjatan's case and Mr. Greenidge's case, that motion, those two motions, were inadmissible, could not be entertained by this House. The Speaker called for a special adjournment of the House to consult on and to study this matter. He determined that the motions were inadmissible as moved by our Chief Whip, the government Chief Whip, and that he could therefore not put those cuts to the House. What would one expect a responsible opposition to do? Accept that this project is a good project. Indeed, we made a mistake. We can't cut more than what is allocated. Withdraw our cut. This is what you would expect a responsible opposition to do. This opposition, this irresponsible opposition with which the people of Guyana are saddled, elected instead to withhold their approval of the entire air transport program in the capital budget. Now, that program doesn't only include the Chadijagan International Airport. It includes final payments in relation to the Ogle Airport. It includes air navigation equipment for the Civil Aviation Authority in Guyana. It includes rehabilitation work to our major hinterland airstrips. All projects that go to the core of Guyana's air transport infrastructure and air transport mechanism. So this irresponsible opposition, refusing in the persons of Mr. Greenidge and Mr. Ramjatan to accept the mistake that they made, persisting now with not just a cut of the Chedijagan airport, but of the entire air transport capital program, then withheld their approval, mobilized their numbers, used, like I said, in the most irresponsible display since the 10th Parliament commenced, used the one-seat tyranny to withhold approval of the entire program, entire capital allocation for air transport. Now, this isn't only a matter for the Parliament. Rehabilitation of hinterland airstrips affect hinterland communities. Every day, planes go in and come out of hinterland communities only if those infrastructure are in good repair. Every day, the cost of accessing a hinterland community, of taking goods into a hinterland community, is affected by the state of repair of our hinterland airstrips. So much so that in the list of items identified by the private sector as their priority areas of concern for Budget 2030, hinterland airstrips was in fact the second highest priority identified by the private sector. The organized private sector of Ghana said hinterland airstrips would be one of our two highest priorities. This point was also made in the Parliament, but the opposition still persisted. And so the sum total is that we now have a result where the entire capital allocation for air transport is cut, and you've heard what that allocation included. But more importantly and worryingly, you have an opposition that is quite happy to discard the views of the private sector, discard the concerns and the well-being and the circumstances of our hinterland communities, disregard the long-term requirements of Guyana's competitiveness as a destination for air travel. Every time a citizen of Guyana pays more than they should pay for a flight to New York, they are paying that excessive fare because we can't have more competition at Timeri because the runway is too short. All of you in this room and all of you looking at this program on your televisions have family in New York who only come back to Guyana once a year because coming to Guyana is too expensive. And coming to Guyana is too expensive because there isn't enough competition on the route. And there isn't enough competition on the route because larger airlines are not able to bring certain aircraft to land at Timeri. This project was intended to remedy that. Many of you who want to travel to Trinidad or Barbados or New York or Toronto on a vacation and struggle to afford to do so are in those circumstances because we don't have sufficient competition in the international air traffic sector in Guyana. This project was intended to fix that. The farmers whose fruits and vegetables don't get airlifted into Miami promptly enough to get to the market, or the farmers the aquaculture farmers whose tilapia don't get to the fresh seafood and fish markets of New York on time, or as affordably as possible, are in those circumstances because air cargo traffic into Guyana doesn't have as much competition as it would if we had a longer runway. So every citizen of Guyana is affected by this, and adversely so. And I want to say in the strongest possible terms that the government is extremely disappointed by this highly irresponsible display by an opposition who simply refused to recognize the obvious merits of a developmental project, refused to acknowledge a mistake that they made, and persisted to inflict damage and harm, penalize the people of Guyana. And this I would describe as the height of parliamentary irresponsibility. Thank you very much. I don't know if any of my other colleagues would like to make a statement or if we should go straight to questions. Minister Irfaan Ali, perhaps as the Minister of Tourism, would have a strong interest in this.
I just want to speak to 4 very important groups. First of all, I would like to speak this morning to the management and staff of the Ogle Airport, one of the largest municipal airport development in the Caribbean. I know that the management and staff were looking forward for the closure of that project so that commercial traffic would commence within the first quarter, before the end of the first quarter and the beginning of the second quarter of this year. This act tonight basically would set that entire development and entire time schedule way back. And as a result, the aviation equipment that would have been procured under this program to ensure that the safety measures meet the international standards, to assure safe landing, is also now in jeopardy, which brings that entire project into jeopardy, and the benefits that would have been derived by LIAT landing directly into Georgetown into jeopardy. As the minister said, tourism has been picking up tremendously, and one of the major barriers to tourism has been the hinterland airstrip, and also a barrier to the mining sector. It has increased the cost of doing business, and in order to facilitate and reduce the cost of doing business and improve the standard of living and reduce the cost of essential commodities for hinterland communities, this allocation was made, and the action of the opposition tonight would bring an immediate halt to the benefit to the Amerindian people and the people of the hinterland communities, the mining sector, the tourist operators, and I speak to them as a second category of people. We spoke about reducing the cost of doing business and improving our competitiveness. The private sector has asked Minister Ben to work towards making the Chedichagan International Airport a Category 1 airport. And the resources here were aimed at improving our competitiveness and driving the airport into becoming a Category 1 airport, which will bring tremendous benefit and tremendous institutional transfers to the airport that would open us up to international travel and meeting the strictest of international standards and security measures. And this now too is at jeopardy. We have scheduled a number of meetings with international airlines on the basis that this new project would be completed within a time frame. Those meetings are now going to be in a limbo because we have to give certain commitments so that these airlines can put these plans into their time schedule of when a service can come to Guyana. All of this is in jeopardy. So the height of the responsibility has been demonstrated by this one-seat tyranny. And today, this morning, at just after 12, we're feeling the striking blow of that irresponsible one-seat majority. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to approach this matter and reflect on what happened here this morning from a national security perspective. When you look at the hinterland of our country and the utilization of these airstrips from a national security perspective, any attempt to deprive the agencies of the resources to modernize these airports and to service these airstrips puts them in danger of neglect. Because without the resources, obviously these airstrips will face some element of neglect on the part of the state. And there are always those elements out there who are prepared to take advantage of airstrips that are neglected to peddle their illegal activities. I refer to people who are involved in drug trafficking, people who are involved in smuggling of firearms, particularly in the interior, using these airstrips to do so. And while the resources made available to address the servicing, the rehabilitation, the modernization of these airstrips, it would have meant that persons who would have been targeting these airstrips for such illegal activities would have had their activities seriously curtailed or minimized. So we have to look at that from a national security perspective. The other thing that struck me is this. In less than 20 minutes, on their feet, in the National Assembly, without any serious consideration being given to a national interest, a decision was made of this nature. Moving from modernization of Chedijagan International Airport to such massive other projects in less than 20 minutes. An opposition that claims to be responsible stands up and makes a decision that is not only the CGI modernization is going to be in the chopping block, it's going to be the other projects linked to the local air transport situation. It's unbelievable, as somebody said. How could an opposition standing on their feet in 20 minutes make such a quantum leap from dealing with the CGIA modernization to the entire air transport section? It's almost amazing. I don't know in which country, which has the resources, which has the wherewithal to do so, where the people would not welcome a project of this type. I know many countries in the Caribbean who would like to have a modernized airport. Here in Guyana, obviously a modernized airport is anathema to those in the opposition. And I think it reminds me of the American serial called Where the Wild Things Are, as far as the characterization of the opposition is concerned. This is vintage Greenwich at work. Vintage Greenwich at work. Imagine them claiming that it was a typographical error in terms of the number. This is gross incompetence. Many times they accuse this government of incompetence, but here is an opposition which claims to have the best brains in the country, engaging in a high degree of incompetence to allow this situation to come to where it is. I think this is a sad day for Guyana. I think it's a very sad day for Guyana. We are not happy about it. We are not happy about it. We want to share the joys with the people of Guyana. We don't want to share sadness with the people of Guyana. But we have to fight. I don't believe what we witnessed this morning is the end. Tomorrow we will see if they commit themselves to further cuts as they have said they will do. Thank you.
But the point must be made that they made a mistake. The AFC made a mistake, the APNU made a mistake. And they were fully prepared for the people of Guyana to suffer for that mistake that they made, without any consideration whatsoever.
If I could just add to my comrades' voices. Just from a procedure point for the public to know a little bit more the details in that, Mr. Ramjitan put forward several motions on April the 12th. He appeared to pay no attention to observe that he was cutting more than what was in the budget. And Mr. Greenwich's motion that was tabled on the 16th, he also did not observe in the haste that he was also taking out more than what was in the budget item. But tonight, and they can blame who they want, because I've heard that they're blaming the clerk in the parliament and the parliament staff, which is another part of the disgrace of what is happening tonight. Because you are ultimately, as a member of parliament, responsible for what you're bringing into the house. And they have had from April the 12th to April the 16th to have noticed what was circulated. So I want to say that any attempt to blame the parliament staff is reprehensible, and it should not be allowed to be carried as they would like to do. The second issue has to do with what happened after the disgraceful, shameful, reckless behavior of this opposition, was that they callously said to us, well, bring it back. You can bring it back. They said the same thing on the night when they cut this specialty hospital from India. Oh, what y'all carrying on about? You can bring it back in supplementary. This behavior is unacceptable. And tonight, we have seen the APNU and AFC being totally undressed, naked and bare in front of the Guyanese people for what they are. reckless, anti-national, anti-patriotic. And we've seen the collusion between Moses Nagamutu and Greenwich, Carl Greenwich. I could give the Creole phrase to describe how close they were, but I don't want to go that far. I leave that to you. But the thing is that the marriage of convenience and the marriage between AFC and APNU has been totally unveiled tonight. And therefore, the Guyanese people will judge them. But these projects are for the betterment of our country and the betterment of our people. And that the Guyanese people must know, as my comrades have said before, that egos and vitriol and hatred won over what was patriotism and national development tonight. And therefore, I think all those who should watch this collusion and this marriage between the two parties who have decided to work in unison to cut the specialty hospital, to cut a whole head of $5.6 billion out of air transport, in particular the CGIA. And tomorrow is another day. Tomorrow there are also motions to cut. And what is one of the cuts they're proposing for tomorrow? The Low Carbon Development Strategy, which is another flagship project in which Guyana's initiative and international, its reputation at the international level is of great importance. The last lick and last point I want to make is that, and why I brought out the point of the callous response, oh, you can bring it back, is that when such things happen in parliaments, they leave scars, and they leave, and they send signals out of our country that this is not a place to do business, because the government they're working with and making arrangements with are at the mercy of a reckless, anti-national, anti-patriotic opposition who can't see beyond the tip of their nose in terms of seeing the interests of our people. And therefore tonight, although we have lost $5.6 billion and particularly under the CGIA, the real losers in this instance are the people of our country. And the repercussions are not going to be felt tomorrow, they're going to be felt for a long time, because people are going to wonder when they come to make investments in our country, whether this is a stable and a secure place they should be coming to.
Let me say quickly that I have repeatedly made the argument that the National Assembly of any country consists of the largest collection of the elected representatives of the people of a country and the largest collection of national leaders in a singular forum. Each of those leaders has a mandate from the people who elected them to that forum called the National Assembly. Guyana is no different. And that mandate is at all times to do what is in the best interest of the people and of the country. Not a single argument can be advanced to justify the cutting of these budgetary allocations, not only to Cheddi Jagan International Airport Expansion Program, but for the different heads that these budgetary allocations were supposed to fund. For example, the acquisition of equipment that is considered to be vital for air traffic control. Now that is vital to the safety of every single traveler. The monies that are required to upgrade, upkeep, repair over 40 hinterland airstrips that would benefit every single traveler into the interior, not to mention the residents and the people who do business in the interior. So that there is absolutely no basis upon which this thing can be justified on the ground of national interest, the welfare of the people, or on any other logical, sensible ground. But what it does more than that is that it exposes the government and the people of this country to a litany of legal liabilities. As the cuts in relation to the specialty hospital would expose us, this one here exposes the government of Guyana to legal liabilities, being party to a contract that now, through no fault of the government cannot discharge the obligations which devolve upon the government under the contract. And there are heavy penal sanctions which are going to flow, quite apart from damages that may be awarded by a court for non-performance of the contract. You have built in the contract the issue of liquidated damages. Even Mr. Ramjatan, in his presentation, referred to the rate at which the contract speaks to liquidated damages. So that is another dimension that they are exposing the people of this country to. Now, when a judgment is awarded against the government of Guyana, where do we get the money to pay? It is again the taxpayers' money that will have to be utilized to deal with this liability. I hark back again also at this point in time to the fact that all of this is taking place in the face of a ruling from the Chief Justice which says very clearly that they have no power to cut the budget. I am pleased to announce that the Chief Justice sent out notices. My office received notices for a hearing, the continuation and possibly, hopefully, the conclusion of the budget cut matter that will culminate in the handing down of the final ruling. I believe the notices we have received fixes the matter for the 8th of May. That's some 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks from now. So we have a whole host of ramifications that are going to flow when that final ruling is handed down, if it is to be a repeat of what the preliminary ruling says. But the opposition, in conclusion, continues to violently assault the projects that are designed to develop this country. Trinidad, they have a brand new airport. Dominica, they are constructing an airport now. Barbados, they just completed an airport. Jamaica, they have an airport.
You want to expand it again?
And they are expanding. And here it is,
Suriname, same.
we, for the first time in a number of years, are going to build an airport of some degree of modernity, and the opposition of the country is saying no. Many countries would like to be in the position that we are, but they don't have the financial wherewithal. Well, we have an opposition that continues to be a cross that every Guyanese have to bear.
Okay, I think, are there any questions? Mr. Shabral?
Yes, Minister, can you say now what is the next step in terms of informing or advising the Chinese about the status of the airport project?
Well, let me say first of all that you ask of next steps. And that question really has to be confronted from a number of dimensions. First of all, you have the dimension that the Attorney General alluded to, next steps as it relates to the legality and constitutionality of budget cuts in general. It may very well be the case that the final outcome of that matter will cause a determination to be made on all of the budget cuts, these ones tonight included. So that is one perspective from which the question of next steps can be viewed. That is to say, await the outcome of the Chief Justice's ruling, or await the Chief Justice's ruling, and be guided by that. Recall, of course, that he has already made a preliminary ruling which concluded that cuts by the opposition, such as made last year, are unconstitutional. So that's one perspective. There is, of course, the second issue, and that is to say, informing all of the other parties to this project. First of all, the Chinese government, because this is a project that is the subject of a memorandum of understanding between the governments of China and Guyana. The China Exim Bank, which is a large developmental financial institution. And of course, the company, the large state-owned Chinese company that is constructing the airport. Well, of course, what transpired tonight would be in the public domain by tomorrow. So whether or not we inform them, although we will, as a matter of courtesy, bring this matter to their attention, they will be aware, if they're not aware already, they will be aware of these developments. We would then have to together put our heads together on our side, be guided by the Attorney General's legal advice, and indeed put our heads together with them, the other parties to this project, to determine how best to address it. The fact of the matter is that the company is in receipt. Well, the facts of the matter are there is a loan agreement between China Exim Bank and the government of Guyana. There is a contract for design and construction between the government of Guyana and the China Harbor Engineering Company. And a mobilization advance has been disbursed by China Exim Bank on the government's behalf to this company. And the company is in possession of that mobilization advance. So all of those dimensions would have to be considered, supported, of course, and guided by the Attorney General's legal advice, and ultimately influenced authoritatively by the Chief Justice's final ruling on this matter. Okay. Perhaps due to the lateness of
Can I ask
yes,
one question,
yes,
sir?
Mr. Brown.
Some people say that we should not be too bothered about the budget cuts in light of what transpired last year. Although some agencies were cut down to $1, they still got funding in the final analysis. Is this really making political heavy weather?
No, well, let me say this. First of all, I don't think it's reasonable to say that one should not be bothered by the budget cuts for a number of reasons. First of all, even if one were to assume that the budget cuts had no constitutional appropriateness, soundness, recall that last year it induced a delay of several months before this matter was concluded. The Chief Justice's ruling didn't come until July 18th, I'm reminded. As a result of which, projects that were affected couldn't commence, payments could not be made. And in general, once there is a shroud of uncertainty over a project or an initiative, the domino consequences are unavoidable. Let us take, for example, the airport project. Minister Fanali said it. Airlines don't decide overnight that they will come to a country or introduce a new route. An airline has a route planning calendar that is several years in advance. They may have deadlines. Let us say that a particular airline, and this may very well be a hypothetical case, but it could be a real case. Let us say that airlines make decisions on new routes, say, by the end of May. And they introduce those new routes within the space of, say, 6 months to a year.
A practical example.
And I am aware that this is not purely a hypothetical example.
Real example. Right?
This is a real example. A large international airline, considering coming to Guyana, their decision cycle on route introduction essentially ends in May. If we miss the boat, first of all, there are hundreds of destinations who are looking for new airlines, and particularly large international airlines, to serve their destinations. We are competing on a list together with hundreds of others.
We are not very special.
And the truth of the matter is that we're not the only attractive destination. There are many others. If you miss the boat, if an airline decides, well, it doesn't appear certain that Guyana will have the infrastructure to accommodate our current aircraft fleet, and so we will take Guyana off the list for the time being.
Take 2 years to get
We
back.
could lose 2 or 3 years before we get back on the list. That means that air travelers into Guyana, producers of agricultural produce in Guyana, could potentially be waiting another 3 or 4 years to have relief from the shortage of competition in the international air travel market. So I wouldn't be dismissive of the budget cuts, notwithstanding I believe that we are on strong ground, buttressed and supported by the Chief Justice's ruling. The mere fact that there exists this uncertainty, I think, is a matter with some consequence and should be viewed with seriousness. If there are no other questions, thank you very much. I know some of you have editorial deadlines.